This story revolves around a bullied introvert. Our protagonist is constantly bullied, and mockery has become such a routine part of his life that he's grown used to it. Not to mention the pressure from his family. But soon, everything is about to change when a mysterious teacher proposes a game, one that doesn't just decide between life and death, but also creates the perfect opportunity for him to deal with the trashy bullies and, in an ironic twist, get his revenge. In a classroom filled with students buzzing with discussion, but in one corner, one student sits alone, quiet, calm, Hayato Makabe. While everyone else socializes, he's buried in a shoujo manga, totally unbothered. Suddenly, his stomach growls loudly, drawing the attention of two girls deep in conversation. Embarrassed, he abruptly stands up from his desk. Cut to outside, he tries drinking water, but as the cool liquid touches his lips, he realizes just how hungry he truly is. At the same time, a group of students approaches troublemakers, judging by the way they came. As they pass by, one of them deliberately bumps into Hayato, causing the water to splash onto his face. Out of nowhere, the girl, my Nanasaka, starts ranting, cursing him and calling him a loser. Hayato, now soaked, adjusts his glasses. He tries to explain the situation, but Mai, along with Kane Tozawa and Sei Kobayashi, cuts him off mid-sentence. They don't let him get a single word out. Apparently, he's so broke, he's reduced to drinking tap water like it's a luxury. Struggling to find the right words, Hayato remains silent. Without wasting another second, Mai leaves with her friends, noting that dealing with him was a complete waste of time. Left soaked and humiliated, Hayato stares at his reflection, understanding that, at this moment, he has nothing. He returns to the classroom. As he opens the door, all eyes immediately land on him, the room falling into a stunned silence before suddenly erupting into laughter. Turns out his financial situation isn't just known, it's public entertainment. He quietly walks to his seat. No reaction, no words. Just then, the classroom door swings open, and a white-haired man strolls in, casually greeting the students. He introduces himself as Miyakazuka, sent by the government, and declares them future test subjects. The students exchange surprised yet curious glances. That's weird, but not the weirdest thing they've seen. But something about his demeanor feels off. To satisfy their curiosity, Miyakazuka agrees to act as their teacher since, eventually, he will be teaching them anyway. Next, he pulls out a tube containing pairs of contact lenses. He orders everyone to wear them immediately. It's a direct command from the government. As he begins distributing the lenses, one student hesitantly speaks up, explaining that she already wears contacts. Even Hayato eyes the lenses with suspicion. Miyakazuka reassures them that the contacts serve as a visual aid, automatically adjusting to fit those who wear glasses or other lenses. Hayato, though reluctant, puts on the contacts, unable to shake the feeling that something isn't quite right. Trying to make sense of it all. The order, the tech, the creepy vibe. Once Miyakazuka confirms that every student has worn their pair, his demeanor shifts drastically. His eyes gleam menacingly as he declares that the experiment is officially underway. He warns them never to remove the contacts until the experiment is over, though he casually mentions he's unsure about their auto-cleaning function. One girl tentatively asks about the nature of the experiment. At that moment, Hayato notices something strange. His vision has changed. Not just his. Everyone in the classroom can suddenly see numbers floating above their heads. Miyakazuka finally writes down the words, "Friend counter," the name of the contact lenses. He then explains that the numbers floating above each student's head indicate the number of friends they have. In summary, the students are now participants in a governmental experiment called the Friendship Culling Project. The rules are simple. The experiment is limited to individual classes. In other words, students can only befriend those within their own class. Referencing a timer, Miyakazuka lets the gravity of the situation sink in. A horrifying silence overtakes the class as his words set in. However, a white-haired boy smirks confidently, warning anyone with the least number of friends to watch out. Miyakazuka nods in agreement. After all, friendship is built on mutual trust. One student, overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all, loudly questions the sanity of this experiment. The teacher's expression hardens. He warns the student not to joke around. But the student ignores him. In the process of removing the lenses, his body stiffens, trembling uncontrollably. He doesn't understand what's happening. His eyes begin to corrode. Then, in an instant, a pink substance bursts out of his orifices. Just like that, the student is sent to the afterlife. Gasps ripple through the room. The seriousness of the experiment is undeniable, and Maya once more warns them not to break any rules. The realization is chilling. Hayato has 0 friends. As the teacher departs, his tone darkens. He leaves them with final instructions, urging them to cooperate with the experiment. The class falls into despair. Hayato, overcome with dread, clutches his head. He has to escape before the 24-hour deadline. With his heart pounding, he dashes down the hallway like his life depends on it. Because it does. He abruptly stops when he spots Maya. At the same time, he notices another student from a different class, a boy who is obviously trying to escape. Judging by the number floating above his head and its color, Hayato knows he's desperate. Approaching him warmly, Hayato asks if he plans to escape. The student timidly nods. Hayato immediately tells him to go first. Things like this, the first one to go always feels like they're walking straight into death. Regardless, the nameless student from the other class jumps out of the window. Upon impact, his brain and eyes liquefy. He dies instantly. Hayato's mouth hangs open in shock, his mind struggling to process what just happened. And he's caught off guard as Maya suddenly asked what he was doing. Back in the hallway, Maya looks straight at Hayato. He asked if the boy just now was used as a scapegoat, a test subject to gauge what might happen if he attempted escape. He loudly denied the accusation, yet deep down, he realized the experiment was far harsher than expected. It wasn't just different, it was brutal. Just then, the crazed teacher frowned in disbelief at his abysmal score. As a word of advice, he warned Hayato that he could easily become a target for others. A chill crawled down Hayato's spine, though he couldn't fully grasp the meaning behind the words. Night falls. With no choice but to remain in school until the experiment ended, the students struggled to adjust. Among them, Hayato sat alone, barely managing to eat. It was painfully obvious, no one intended to befriend him. And why would they? Befriending someone meant condemning another to death. Now, reflecting on Maya words, he finally understood his role. He was the sacrificial lamb. His classmates had already decided they would save themselves at his expense. With gritted teeth, he questioned the cruel logic of it all. Why should he die just because he had no friends? Suddenly, an announcement rang out. The students were permitted to use their phones, though they were strictly forbidden from sharing any content related to the experiment. One by one, his classmates checked in with their parents, their screens lighting up with messages of concern. A message appeared, from someone named Kisaki, asking for his whereabouts. Then another message, this time from his mother. Hayato stared at his screen, gripping the phone tightly, his teeth clenching. It had always been like this. Memories resurface. Once, on his way home from school, Hayato had approached his house only to hear strange noises. Words. Yes, words that clearly belonged to adult content, echoed through the air. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. This was not thrilling in the slightest. With a deadpan face, he pushed the door open. Inside, his mother performed yoga, but not alone. A grinning geezer moved beside her in a somewhat exaggerated manner. He continued his performance with unrelenting enthusiasm, claiming to bless her with fortune. The excitement was written all over her face. She could feel it. The old man turned, his gaze locking onto Hayato with an eerie grin. Still smiling, he proclaimed that Hayato, too, had been blessed. His mother happily thanked him, but Hayato remained unimpressed. Then, his little sister greeted him. The geezer's focus shifted, his unsettling presence now directed toward the girl. She instinctively recoiled. Yet the man insisted she visit his dojo, promising to store fortunes within her. Their mother, clearly under his spell after receiving countless fortunes, agreed without hesitation. The man's attention shifted again, this time back to Hayato. Making a creepy and perverted face, he suggests Hayato also join the dojo. Before Hayato could refuse, his mother cut in, nearly pleading as she handed over money, his portion of the contribution. The old man took it gleefully, grinning as he suggested Hayato should help the cause. With that, he waved, wishing Kisaki would follow in their mother's footsteps. Once the man was gone, Hayato turned to his sister. Seriously, she must never go near that place. But before he could say much, his mother silenced him with a sharp slap. It was clear, she was completely brainwashed by the nonsense the old geezer had been selling. Hayato, sinking into despair, contemplated his situation. No friends. A mother ensnared by a cult. Meanwhile, his eyes lingered on a message from his sister. She wanted to pick him up. Tears welled up. With their mother lost to this madness, what would happen to his little sister? His fingers moved swiftly, replying that he couldn't leave class. For the first time, he had a purpose. If nothing else, he would survive, to protect her. But first, he needed to wash his face. Later, Hayato walked into the boys' restroom, only to come face to face with a girl. It was his classmate, Ami Shirano. She simply stared at him. Hayato quickly brushed past her, choosing to ignore the unexpected encounter. But she had something on her mind. "Aren't you going to wait?" Ami called out. Hayato stopped in his tracks, caught off guard. Ami beamed at him with a cheerful smile, one that could only be described as dangerously charming, pure waifu material. "She offers to be friends." Hayato's eyes widened in shock. There was no way, she was definitely up to something. Before Hayato could respond to Ami's sudden offer of friendship, two familiar faces appeared. Kane and Sei Kobayashi showed up, clearly looking for her. Without a word, they grabbed Ami by the hand and pulled her away. She didn't even get the chance to explain herself. Hayato stood frozen, confused. He had no idea what just happened. After finishing his business in the restroom, he hurried back to the classroom, only to find Ami surrounded by the worst possible group. Her friend count had unexpectedly risen to 6. Anxious, Hayato approached, hoping to resume their conversation. But before he could say anything, he was abruptly cut off by an annoyed Mai Nanasaka. Irritated by his presence, she wasted no time in making her displeasure known. Hayato, however, remained firm, declaring his intent to make friends. Mai's irritation escalated instantly. Out of nowhere, she pulled out a lucky charm and waved it in front of him, demanding he read the room. Apparently, the charm had been sold to her father by Hayato's mother, for a staggering 50,000 yen. Hayato's face instantly dropped. He already knew where this was heading. Mai continued furious. She revealed that Hayato's mother had seduced her father into purchasing the charm, resulting in her parents' divorce. Hayato, clueless about the situation, could only offer a weak apology. Then, the charm's contents were revealed. Dirty nails belonging to the old geezer. Now it all made sense. Mai despised Hayato not just for his existence, but because his mother had torn her family apart. Speechless, Hayato could only listen as Mai ranted, going on about how he should just die for the sake of others. Daytime arrived. Hayato had less than 1 hour before the experiment's countdown ended. At this rate, he could end up just like the previous victims. Meanwhile, Mai was borrowing a manga from her classmate, Shiho, who was taken aback. To make name tracking easier, let's just call her Manga Girl. Holding the book, she tried to explain how she had recently bought it. But Mai wasn't interested. Her tone was demanding, almost threatening, as she snatched the manga and left with a curt thanks. Two nearby girls whispered, discussing Mai's odd behavior. Recently, she had been borrowing things left and right. Hayato kept a straight face, though inwardly, his thoughts spiraled. He's about to die, and his classmates only care about their stuff. His composure wavered, and despair started sinking in. But then, an idea struck him. He quickly rummaged through his desk, hoping to befriend Manga Girl by offering her his manga. To his horror, it was missing. He emptied his entire desk, but the book was nowhere to be found. Reflecting on the situation, he realized what had happened. Someone stole it. Taking a deep breath, he pieced things together. He knew who took it. It was Mai. Still, something didn't add up. She wasn't even reading the manga she just took. Was she just borrowing books? It didn't make sense. But time was running out. He had to act fast. Once again, gossip about Mai filled the classroom. This time, she had borrowed a dictionary, despite never being the type to study. Immediately, something clicked. Hayato grabbed his phone, scrolling feverishly, as if his life depended on it. Later, he approached the girl, describing the dictionary in detail, leaving her stunned. Naturally, the girls asked how he knew so much. In response, he showed them a listing. Mai had sold the dictionary online for 2,000 yen. Furious, the girls stormed toward Mai, accusing her of selling something that didn't belong to her. Mai, maintaining a blank expression, flatly denied everything. But she quickly pulled out her phone, claiming the online account had to belong to Mai. Before the situation could escalate further, her friend intervened, attempting to calm things down. Then, something familiar caught the girl's eye. She recognized it immediately. It was a DVD she had lent to Mai. Her favorite one. Mai had sold it, which she calls unforgivable. Trying to play dumb, Mai acted as if she had no idea what was going on. Naturally, she demanded proof. How did they know the account even belonged to her? That was when Hayato stepped in. He insisted Mai show her phone. To everyone's shock, his stolen manga was listed. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an old, rare edition, with only 100 copies in existence. Which meant the purchase notification had definitely come from Mai's phone. Now she was trapped. Even worse, the listing contained the manga borrowed from Manga Girl. Mai tried to protest, insisting they were falsely accusing her. Hayato, without saying a word, scanned her desk. Then, in a single motion, he pulled out everything she had borrowed, or rather, stolen. Saving her the trouble of shipping, he also handed each item over to its rightful owner. Manga Girl, disgusted, immediately severed ties with Mai. No one could be friends with a thief. Mai, stunned, couldn't comprehend what was happening. But it didn't stop there. Her gossip circle followed suit. Even Sei Kobayashi admitted she had originally planned to ostracize Hayato and sacrifice him. Kane Tozawa agreed. She wouldn't be friends with someone like Mai. Her friend count plummeted to 1. Panic gripped Mai's face. And just as Sei Kobayashi declared their friendship was over, she screamed in agony. Her count had hit 0. Worst of all, she had less than 5 minutes left. Enraged, Mai cursed her friends for betraying her. In response, they pointed out how irritating she was, always taxing them whenever she had the chance. Adding fuel to the fire, Manga Girl angrily wished she belonged to a different class. Then, realization dawned on her. It was her fault. Just then, the dictionary girl approached Hayato, introducing herself as Shirori. She kindly offered to be his first friend. Without hesitation, he agreed. The manga girl chimed in as well, making the offer even sweeter. Just like that, Hayato had reached the safe zone with a friend count of 2. He felt relieved. Meanwhile, Mai was horrified. She had only 3 minutes left. Coming to her senses, she desperately pleaded with her former friends, promising to repay them everything. But her supposed friend relished in the sight of her suffering, mocking her. They made it clear, they wanted nothing to do with her. The situation sank deep into Mai's heart, and despair consumed her. Abandoning all pride, she pleaded for help, her voice trembling. Yet, everyone kept their distance. Now, with only 17 seconds remaining, she realized she was at death's door. She continued to beg for help. Then, out of nowhere, Maya Kuzuka appeared, shocked that Mai's friend count had hit 0. At that same moment, her brain and eyes liquefied. Meanwhile, Hayato broke into a cold sweat, thankful that he had survived. He could see his little sis. As the men in protective suits tended to Mai's body, Maya Kuzuka began a lecture, warning them how easily people hit rock bottom due to a simple misunderstanding. He noted that Mai's downfall had been caused by something as petty as money. Mistrust had sealed her fate. In summary, no one had helped her because her behavior had left a deep hatred in their hearts. And now, it was time for the next experiment. This time, everyone except the group with the fewest friends will die. Hayato was shocked that the experiment was continuing. At this point, it felt like Squid Game. Suddenly, everyone's friend count was reset to 0. The timer was set, signaling the start of the next experiment. While others panicked, Hayato reflected on Mayukozuka's words. Then, with confidence, he assured the entire class that nobody would die, that they would all survive. His bold statement successfully caught Mayukozuka's attention. The manga girl asked him what he meant, so Hayato loudly suggested that they all form a single group. If they did, they could ensure survival. Shiori and her friend were immediately excited. But settings like this shows betrayal is coming. Or rather, a fool was about to disagree. Tamataka, the guy who looked like his father ran the Yakuza, scoffed. He had no interest in joining forces with losers. Instead, he planned to select his own friends personally. Mayukozuka, looking like a cunning genius, was intrigued by the fascinating turn of events. He was curious to see what would unfold. Right on cue, Tamataka's group approached. And just like that, without a single command, he had gathered 5 people without breaking a sweat. The men assembled like the Avengers, increasing their number to 12. Hayato understood how dire the situation had become. Even if they joined forces, Tamataka's group already had the majority. Determined, Hayato loudly argued against the fool's reasoning. Tamataka only scoffed in response, mocking him for his nonsense. With a smug grin, he concluded that Hayato was just as gross as a golden fish. Now, Hayato's group was backed into a corner. They had no choice but to join Tamataka's side. However, a background character, Sora Hosoya, who looked like someone destined to die soon, chimed in. He suggested that they take a closer look at the fool. His wristwatch and chain, they were fake. Basically, Tamataka just wanted attention, to look cool. Proving his point, Sora approached Tamataka, showering him with praise and requesting to be his errand boy. Surprisingly, Tamataka agreed without hesitation, prompting Sora to thank him. Now, Tamataka's followers urged the undecided ones to make up their minds quickly. The 2 girls hesitated for a moment. Then, they agreed to join Tamataka's group. Meanwhile, Sora eagerly approached Hayato, insisting that he should copy what he had done. After all, survival was all that mattered. Suddenly, Tamataka's voice cut through the atmosphere, making Sora tense up. He laid out his condition, a payment of 100,000 yen to be accepted. The boys were stunned by the absurd demand. Feeling triumphant and arrogant, Tamataka smirked, reminding them that he had already said he would choose his friends personally. Sora's eyes widened in shock at the absurd amount. There was no way they had that kind of money. Meanwhile, Hayato questioned Tamataka's reasoning, but Mayukozuka simply laughed at him. To him, this was just how the world worked. Hayato, however, objected firmly, insisting that everyone could be saved if they stuck together. Mayukozuka could only give a helpless expression. After all, Hayato was still just a kid. Without saying much, he left, anticipating the result the next day. Tamataka casually pulled out his phone, displaying his PayPal QR code for electronic transfer, reminding them that if they wanted to remain friends, they had to pay up. Panic set in within Hayato's group. Strangely enough, his group was where all the waifus had gathered. Sora, in desperation, immediately turned to Hayato for money, only to realize his mistake. He didn't have the amount, let alone enough to lend to someone else. The fool of the group shot him a defiant look, asking why the hold-up, signaling to the others. His group suggested using their phones to borrow rather than standing around clueless. Sora knew his background. He didn't have friends to borrow such a huge sum from. This sent Tamataka into a rage. He threatened to increase the amount if they kept stalling. Panic spread among the group. Instinctively, they began calling the first person that came to mind when one needed money. Suddenly, Hayato snapped. He screams for them to be calm. It was obvious. The fool's group was the largest, but their situation wasn't entirely hopeless. They had 10 people and only needed 2 more members to make the amount. Tamataka gave a wicked grin. Just then, the manga girl interrupted Hayato, holding up her phone. She admits he doesn't know much about Tamataka. Naturally, Hayato was shocked. How did Tamataka have so much money? The girl highlighted a rumor. The guy was involved in shady schemes. In other words, he's the mafia boss of this manga, she hinted. The translation wasn't perfect, but essentially, she meant that Tamataka would do anything for money, or at least, that was what she thought. However, Shiori believed the fool wasn't the case. She argues that his followers are all human. They must understand the importance of life over cheap accessories. Tamataka, unfazed, lit a cigarette. Shiori pressed the fool's group. Do not be blinded by cash. After all, 10 lives are at stake. In response, Tamataka gestured for one of his men to lend him an arm. A sinister aura surrounded him as he questioned Shiori's earlier statement. Without hesitation, he pressed his lit cigarette onto the boy's skin. The guy gritted his teeth against the pain, refusing to flinch. She shouldn't underestimate the power of money, Tamataka warned. After all, no one is stupid enough to take a cigarette burn for no reason. He drove his point home, declaring, they shouldn't underestimate their brotherly bond. And if life is so precious, they should hurry up and pay. One by one, the group resigned themselves to their fate. The first to make a payment were Mai's friends, followed by another NPC with resentment in his heart. Shockingly, Shiori stepped forward to pay, leaving her friend frozen in disbelief. She reminded her about their friendship since middle school. But could anyone blame her? No one planned on dying if money could save them. Suddenly, a classmate pleaded to join the group. His name was Wataru Sabesa. Not that it mattered. He was clearly doomed. Nonetheless, Tamataka acknowledged his situation. Since Wataru's parents were both ill, he wasn't a demon. However, he couldn't join for free. Others had already made their payments. Wataru lowered his head in gratitude. Tamataka, wearing a mocking grin, offered him an entrance task. Wataru was shocked to learn that he had to take an entrance test. Tamataka explained that all he needed to do was prove that he was worth more than 100,000 yen. To determine this, Tamataka devised the perfect test. Recently, he had been repeatedly ambushed at the school gate, so Tamataka called for a fighter named Ken to take on the assailant. Ken accepted the order, even allowing Wataru to use any tricks he had up his sleeve. However, Wataru struggled to even get into a fighting stance. His body trembled uncontrollably. Without warning, Ken delivered a brutal punch, causing the poor kid to bleed. Concerned, Ken asked Wataru why he was fighting, but Wataru simply collapsed, automatically conceding defeat. Ken turned to Tamataka, realizing that his opponent had not been the best choice. Tamataka, however, insisted that the fight continue. Ken was stunned. Wataru was practically paralyzed with fear and had no fight left in him. Understanding the situation, Tamataka approached Wataru and reminded him of Mai's brutal death, asking if he wanted to end up like her. Immediately, adrenaline surged through Wataru's body. He charged at Ken. Ken was both stunned and caught off guard by Wataru's sudden attack. With a powerful shove, Wataru sent Ken slamming into a desk. The classroom fell into a stunned silence, but Wataru barely had time to process the moment before Ken, now enraged, retaliated with a crushing fist to Wataru's face, sending him flying backward and crashing through the classroom window. As the shattered glass scattered across the floor, Ken furiously demanded to know why Wataru had made him look bad. Meanwhile, Hayato recounted the events leading up to this moment, insisting that they stop. But it was too late. Wataru was already plummeting from the window. His fall resulted in his death. Ken was in shock. In that instant, he had earned the grim title of Classmate's Slayer. Despair washed over his face as he struggled to understand what had just happened. Hayato then explained that the experiment's cleaning program automatically triggered if someone attempted to escape, meaning jumping out of the window had sealed Wataru's fate. Tamataka complimented Ken on a job well done. But Ken, sharp and cold, replied that the match had been decided from the start. He had never intended to actually finish Wataru. Tamataka simply nodded, noting that the purpose of the fight was to reassure those who had paid that they had made the right investment. Ken fell to his knees, realizing that in the end, he had nearly lost himself as well. But Tamataka ignored his distress and walked over to another student. Without hesitation, he slapped the fool, menacingly demanding whether he needed a reminder to light his cigarette. The student complied immediately. Meanwhile, Hayato felt an unsettling suspicion about Tamataka. He shared his concerns with the remaining members of his group, realizing if they had to survive due to payment. Even after the experiment, Tamataka would continue to exert his control. The only solution was to put an end to him. Soro, however, was skeptical. He pointed out that Tamataka was like an impenetrable fortress, armed with both money and power. That was precisely why Hayato was straining every brain cell to find a way. Just then, a text from his mother interrupted his thoughts. She planned to sell his father's belongings. Frustration welled up in him. She always contacted him at the worst possible times. He quickly replied, reminding her that those items were all they had left of his father. When she told Hayato that it was a donation for his father's reincarnation, the boy was shocked. He hastily suggested that she take some cash from his desk instead. He immediately understood that this was the foolish work of that perverted old geezer. It disgusted him how people could be so easily deceived by appearances. While outwardly respectable, inside they were rotten. But this realization sparked an idea, a way to finally turn the situation around. Without another word, he left the classroom, leaving his group bewildered. He dashed down the hallway, heading straight for the library. There, he began searching for a specific book. After some time, Hayato's face lit up with relief. He had found what he was looking for. They were going to survive. Later that day, Sara complained to Kane about Hayato's whereabouts. However, before they could continue, they were interrupted by a loud commotion. It was Tamataka. He complained about their grievances and offered them a chance to play a game, with the winner joining his side. His group grinned wickedly, exuding an unsettling confidence. Kane, sensing danger, whispered to Sora not to look at them. The fool, on the other hand, relished their growing unease, reminding them of their hopeless situation. Approaching them with a sinister expression, he explained that Wataru's case had merely been an accident. He planned on letting Wataru join, but only if he had endured the beatdown. He made it clear that watching them suffer wasn't his goal, but that didn't mean he would enjoy watching them die either. Then, with a twisted smirk, Tamataka suggested his previous statement again, insisting they play a simple game of tug-of-war. Sora didn't understand. In response, Tamataka, now leaving, instructed them to leave the preparations to him. The scene shifted to nighttime. Standing before them as their opponent was Shiori. Tamataka smirked and signaled for the game to begin, but Sora immediately pointed out the glaring imbalance between the two sides. Their opponent was Shiori, and that alone meant the game wouldn't be easy, especially for her friend. Suddenly, the fool decided to make things even more interesting. At that moment, two classmates arrived carrying buckets. They placed them in front of Sora and Kane. Cold sweat formed on Sora's brow. He didn't understand what was inside. With a menacing expression, Tamataka revealed the contents, shattered glass, exclusively prepared for them. Kane gasped in horror as she realized what that meant. They had to wear them. Tamataka confirmed it, instructing them to proceed immediately. Look at him making that stupid face, bro will definitely meet his end. Regardless, she took the first step. She let out an ear-piercing scream as the glass tore into her skin. But Tamataka showed no mercy, pressing her to proceed quickly. The girl trembled, tears streaming down her face as she struggled against the agonizing pain. Now, he turned his attention to Sora. With no other choice, Sora stepped forward, letting out a low grunt of pain. Satisfied, Tamataka snapped his fingers, signaling the start of the game. But Shiori wasn't taking this seriously. After all, Kane was her friend. Tamataka loudly demanded that she not lose. She already knows what will happen if that happens. Realizing she had no choice, her best friend pleaded, begging her not to do it. However, in tears, Shiori responded. She knew she couldn't disobey the fool. And just like that, both fell, covered in injuries from the shattered glass. Just then, Hayato appeared. He was stunned by the horrifying scene before him. Sora, struggling through his pain, reported everything to him. Understanding the situation, Hayato urgently instructed them not to stay in the class. He knew what Tomitaka might do next. But Tomitaka only threw a sassy remark, grinning. After all, there's no way out. Eventually, they'll all come crying to him for help, just like Wataru. Hayato ignored him completely, carrying his injured friends outside. Later, he gently tended to their wounds. Meanwhile, Sora sat in silence, wondering if it was all pointless. They were going to die the next day anyway. Blaming themselves, they regretted ever asking the fool for anything. But Hayato remained calm, taking the initiative. He promised that they would all survive. Still, they seemed doubtful. To reassure them, he explained that he had a plan to change the game. All they needed to do was avoid playing another of Tomitaka's twisted games. With that, he left without another word. Once again, Hayato was gone. Now, with only 54 minutes left, his group panicked, unsure of what to do. Determined not to die without trying something, Kane pushed open the classroom door, finding Tomitaka chatting with his followers. The fool grinned mischievously. He had known they would come back. Sora hesitated, worried about Hayato, but she urged him to forget about him. Without saying much, she pleaded for a chance to join Tomitaka's group. Seeing no other option, Sora joined in. Suddenly, Tomitaka tossed them a cutter. He instructed them to tear off their fingers. Both of them are shocked. Just as he begins to revel in the moment, celebrating his dominance, enjoying the feeling of being at the top, Hayato suddenly appeared. Annoyance flickered across his face. He warned them not to play any twisted game. Just as Sora asked what had taken him so long, Kane cut him off, suggesting he join them immediately to plead his case. Hayato, however, merely smirked, mocking their concern. There was no need to leave the group. After all, in just 10 minutes, the fool's group would cease to exist. This statement infuriated Tomitaka, asking what he meant by disappearing. Hayato remained unfazed, standing firm in his conviction. He declares the fool was going to die. Unable to contain his rage, Tomitaka grabbed the first object his hands landed on and hurled it at Hayato's head. But Hayato remained calm, dropping a bombshell of his own. His group was about to become the largest, his forehead showing a huge scar. He called for Ami and Mai's friends, offering them a chance to join his ranks. Mai's friend refused. After all, they had paid to be in Tomitaka's group. Ami, however, having something to say, remained silent. Still brimming with confidence, Tomitaka pointed out that his group had more members. But Hayato simply adjusted his hair, preparing to give him a harsh reality check. Suddenly, Hayato called out to Ken. Tomitaka was stunned as Ken approached without saying a word. He tried to stop him, but it was too late. Ken joined Hayato's group, leaving Mai's friends speechless and utterly confused. Furious, Tomitaka demanded an explanation, but his followers abandoned him one by one, flocking to Hayato like when the matchmaking pairs you with bot teammates. One of the followers whispered to Hayato, reminding him to keep his promise. Now, the two exchanged clueless looks, realizing they had walked over shattered glass for nothing. Yet, amidst the chaos, one fool from Tomitaka's group refused to leave. He had paid to be there. Idiot. As the group continued shrinking, Tomitaka grew desperate, ordering his followers not to move a single step. Just as he prepared to gaslight them into staying, Ken suddenly tossed the golden ring, boldly declaring the end of their so-called brotherhood. He owed Tomitaka nothing. One by one, the rest followed. Tomitaka stood there, furious and speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. These guys had been tamed by him, and now they were swapping sides as easily as changing clothes. Hayato reminded the remaining members that they had only 20 minutes left. Do they still plan to stick with the fool? But everything was too confusing for them to process. Meanwhile, Mai's friends expressed their wish to join Hayato's group. He welcomed them, making everyone realize that they and Tomitaka were now the only ones left in his dwindling faction. Finally, Ami made up her mind. She apologized to Hayato and asked to join his group. Smiling charmingly, Hayato agreed. And just like that, the fool stood alone, the reality sinking in. Hayato turned back to Sora and Kane, apologizing for taking so long and assuring them they could finally relax. In truth, Sora had never doubted him, only expressed concern. Kane shared the same sentiment. Playfully, Sora reminded Kane about the things she had said behind his back. Hayato didn't blame them. If he were in their shoes, he would have done the same. Suddenly, Tamataka grabbed his former lackey by the shirt in a fit of rage. Ken swiftly stopped his pathetic struggles, reminding him how this is 20 against 1. With a conflicted heart, Tamataka finally admitted his faults and, swallowing his pride, asked to join Hayato's group. Hayato responded with an eerily wide grin. Tamataka's expression darkened as he heard Hayato agree, on one condition. After all, Hayato remarked, he has the right to choose his friends.